So the title of this presentation is Sans justice, pas de paix, no justice, no peace. I'd like to start by talking a little bit about the Haiti Support Group, in case you're not familiar with the work that we do. So next year, we will be celebrating 30 years. We established in 1992. And what we do is aim to work very closely, and we have been working very closely over the 30 years with Haitian civil society organizations, seeking to really voice their concerns. And the main product that we have is our Haiti briefing. And we do have in the pipeline to write a briefing about the current crises that are happening. And I've seen that our executive member Yves has shared and Omar have shared the link to the Haiti Support Group website. So please do have a look and have a read of the analyses that we've been publishing over the years. So in this presentation, I aim to talk a little bit about the the historical context as to what's happening in Haiti at the moment. Let's see if I can, there we go. And I thought it would be useful to start with the date. All right, so 7th of February of this year, 2021, is a key date to have in mind. This is the date that the term of Jovenel Moïse's presidency expired. And to better understand this, it's important to be familiar with the 1987 Haitian Constitution. And this constitution came into effect after 30 years of the brutal dictatorship under François Papadoc and Jean-Claude Baby Duvalier. And the formation of this 1987 constitution then was very much the desire to transition to and promise of democracy. So civil society organizations lobbied to have their input into this new constitution, to really have their voices heard and to have an inclusive constitution and society. So I thought it would be useful to have a look at the preamble of this 1987 constitution. And I thought it was really interesting because if we look at the rhetoric of this particular preamble, we're seeing that, there really is promise of change in Haiti. So I will read out this preamble. The Haitian people proclaim this constitution in order to ensure their inalienable and imprescriptible rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in conformity with the Act of Independence of 1804 and the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Man of 1948, constitute a socially just, economically free, and politically independent Haitian nation. Establish a strong and stable state capable of protecting the country's values, traditions, sovereignty, independence, and national vision. Implant democracy, which entails ideological pluralism and political rotation, and affirm, wish I had written this in white, and affirm the inalienable rights of the Haitian people. Strengthen national unity by eliminating all discrimination between the urban and rural populations, by accepting the community of languages and culture, and by recognizing the right to progress, information, education, health, employment, and leisure for all citizens. Ensure the separation and the harmonious distribution of the powers of the state and the service of the fundamental interests and priorities of the nation. Set up a system of government based on fundamental liberties and the respect for human rights, social peace, economic equity, concerted action, and participation of all the people in major decisions affecting the life of a nation through effective decentralization. And also, this 1987 constitution then stipulates in Articles 1.134.1 that the term of the president is 5 years. This term begins and ends on February 7th, following the date of elections. Article 134.2, as amended of 9th of May to 19th of June 2012, the presidential election takes place on the last Sunday of October of the 5th year of the presidential mandate. The president-elected enters into his functions on 7th of February following the date of his election. In the case, this is very important, where the ballot cannot take place before the 7th of February, the president-elected enters his functions immediately after the validation of the ballot, and his mandate is considered to have commenced on the 7th of February of the year of election. So now we're familiar with some of the pertinent parts of the Constitution. And as you may or may not be familiar, Moïse called for a constitutional reform, which this present Constitution doesn't actually allow for, granting the president more powers. So it's useful now for us to understand who exactly is this man, okay, Jovenel Moïse. He was fairly unknown before 2015, but was a banana exporter, businessman. And essentially he was designated by Michel Martelly to replace him as president of the Parti Haitien Tête Calée, okay, the Haitian bald-headed party. And Martelly is a former compas artist, an avid supporter of the Duvalier regime. And Martelly himself was elevated to presidency by the US government under the Obama administration by Hillary Clinton in 2011, much to the dismay and anger of the Haitian people. And Moïse's ascension to the Haitian presidency was sponsored by the Imperial Trident, to use Professor Saito-Nfus's words, Canada, France, and the US. And in 2015 then, myself and fellow HSG exec member Yves Hayes, we were in Haiti at this time to observe the election process and interview Haitian civil society who were also observing the processes. And we actually tried to get interviews with the representatives from the European Union, but they obviously declined. So I've lost my train of thought. So Moïse received 32.8% of votes in the first round of the 2015 elections, which were held on the 15th of October, which qualified for a runoff with the second place finisher, Jude Celestin. However, an exit poll conducted by the Haiti Sentinel showed that Moïse only actually received 6% of the vote, and many observers called these results fraudulent. Thousands of people took to the streets in violent protest, forcing the postponement of the runoff election. But of course, Moïse continued to claim to have won these elections fair and square, but as we saw, rife with fraud and vote rigging. The second round of voting should have been held on the 27th of December 2015, but was held instead on the 27th of November 2016. So the election officials said that Moïse won the 2016 election in the first round based on preliminary results with an estimated voter turnout of only 21%, which outdid the embarrassingly low 23% in 2010 when they were looking for the replacement of René Préval. So therefore, despite delays, Moïse's term began in February 2016 in line with the Constitution, and thus his mandate ends this year. Several groups in Haiti are calling for Moïse to step down, including feminist groups, students, and members of the opposition, human rights groups, the Haitian Bishops' Conference, the Protestant Federation of Haiti, the Haitian Bar Association, are all arguing that Moïse's mandate ended this year and that he must step down. Moïse is countering this argument, claiming that his term ends next year. And it's also important to bear in mind that the parliament expired last year, January. And he is thus ruling by decree. So Moïse's government has been dubious at best. We already have seen how he came into politics, which didn't paint the best picture. and he's also been accused of money laundering. Insert the Petrocaribe scandal, which thus sparked the Petrocaribe Challenge, which was created by, I forget his name, escapes me, but Haitian who is based in Canada, who started this challenge that went viral on Twitter, the Petrocaribe, where did the Petrocaribe money go? So a brief summary of what exactly the Petrocaribe, what Petrocaribe is for those of you who might not be familiar with this program. So it was set up by the Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez in 2005 as a means for Venezuela to give other countries in the Caribbean development loans. But instead of loaned oil, it loaned oil instead of cash. And in the case of Haiti, they only had to pay 60% for the oil it received, and the remaining 40% could be paid over the course of 25 years at 1% interest. So with this money, these development loans, it was planned for social development programs such as building power stations, expanding electricity networks, improving access to airports, and so forth. But unfortunately, in Haiti's case, around $2 billion disappeared. And that was notable because there was no evidence of any sort of programs, social development programs put in place for the Haitian people. So, although investigations into where this money went started before Moïse took office, there were actually allegations brought against him once he did take office, that he actually helped to embezzle funds from a large Petrocaribe project before he came to office, when he was head of the Agritrans company. And it was said that Agritrans was paid around $700,000 to repair roads, even though his entire business was focused on bananas. His response has been absolute denial, evidently refusal to step down. And as we saw after February, that Moïse took it upon himself to fire Supreme Court justices. Why? Again, let's go back to the Constitution, okay? So the Article 149 of the 1987 Constitution stipulates that a member of the High Court should serve as provisional president if a president is unable to perform his duties. So should Moïse have been ousted, the Supreme Court judge would have taken his place. And actually, as of February of this year, there was a nominated transitional president called Joseph Messin Jean-Louis to take Moïse's place, who is the Supreme Court judge, but Moïse effectively fired him and two other Supreme Court judges. Moïse has also, during his time, during his mandate, he expanded the army that Jean-Bertrand Aristide actually disbanded during his presidency in 1995. Moïse has also created a national intelligence agency, and he created two decrees on national security. So one of them being this national intelligence agency, which is a technical and administrative institution whose primary focus is on information gathering and the repression of hostile acts that can be perceived as a threat to national security. The second decree then is an elaboration on the term terrorism. So what does that mean in the Haitian context? Moïse has decreed that this includes robbery, extortion, arson, and destruction or degradation of public and private goods. Articles 1.12 and 1.13 of this elaborated definition goes even further and specifies that acts of crowding, blocking public roads to obstruct movement are included in this definition. Those who are found guilty of these terrorist acts can spend between 30 to 50 years in prison, facing a fine which ranges from about 2 million to 200 million Haitian gourds. And this translates as between 28,000 to 2,800,000 US dollars. So we're seeing here that Moise is really trying to limit the right to protest, right? And as we know, when it comes to manifestations and protests, things like this do happen. So you are very much at high risk of going to prison should you participate in these terrorist acts. So the referendum, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, this relates to the Constitution again. Okay, so in January of this year, the Independent Consultative Committee set up by the Haitian government published a new draft constitution for public discussion. The idea is to reform the 1987 constitutions, and there are quite a few innovations that Moise seeks to incorporate. But in doing so, according to the draft article 139, this would grant immunity to the president while in office and after his term. So, after his or her term. So, should Moise, anything he does during his term would not, that would call into question his actions, would not be prosecuted according to this draft constitution. And he also aims to redirect power to the presidency as seen in section 3 of this draft constitution. So these actions are very much reminiscent of the dictatorship era and has thus understandably stoked fear, reticence and anger among the Haitian population. The protests have been incorporating anti-government and anti-imperial rhetoric, since not only are these issues manifesting themselves at the domestic level, but very much have international underpinnings. So if we look to what's happening at the moment, okay, we're very much aware that criminal activity is unfortunately on the rise in Haiti. And I want to talk a bit about the armed forces who are, some could say, very much not doing their job. So as I mentioned before, in 1995, Aristide disbanded the army. Moise reinstalled it, and at present there are around 500 members of the army. But whereas if we look at the police force, then this has around a hefty 15,000 members, making it the principal armed forces of Haiti. And this force received support from the US, and in the WikiLeaks cables, the WikiLeaks leaked cables, this reveals the extent to which the US government has and is managing and supervising the Haitian National Police Force. So let's talk a bit about the gangs now. So approximately a third of Port-au-Prince's territory, the capital of Haiti, is affected by criminal activity, and violence is propagated by an estimated 95 armed gangs. One of the gang leaders who is very much prominent, and we see in the headlines, is Jimmy Cherizier, aka Barbecue, who is leader of the revolutionary forces. That part he added in to the name of the formerly known G9 family and allies. It's now the revolutionary forces of the G9 family and allies. And the purpose of this particular gang, which started last year summer, is to start a revolution, to fight against the rotten, corrupt system in Haiti, presided over by 12 families of Haiti's tiny bourgeoisie, in the words of Jimmy Barbecue there. And this Jimmy then used to be actually a police officer, and he's from the Delmas 6 region in Port-au-Prince. So really, we're seeing that he's seeing himself as a kind of revolutionary leader looking to protect particularly the Delmas area but fighting on behalf of Haitian society, fighting against corruption. But there are several other gangs running rampant in and around Port-au-Prince, which has led to the displacement, unfortunately, of thousands of Haitians. And at this time, there are more than 5,000 internally displaced refugees currently staying in a sports stadium in Carrefour. I thought I had a picture. Let me see. Okay, while that's loading, I'll just leave that there. But these are videos, I'm not sure if that's actually going to show, of gang leaders basically looting at their leisure. And here is a video also of people, displaced people in the stadium, okay, men, women, and children. And these are the hotspot areas of where crime is rampant in Port-au-Prince. So Cité Soleil, very well known as having very high crime rates. We have Bel Air here as well. And this area is where the National Palace is, Martissan, and please, for those of you who know Port-au-Prince much better than I am, I think Delmas area is around here, in this area. The kidnappings then are also very much high on the rise. Colombia, interestingly, is now advising Haiti on how to tackle the kidnapping crisis. Colombia used to be known as the kidnapping capital of the world, but now is advising Haiti. And as of April, the Center for Human Rights Analysis and Research in Port-au-Prince recorded that there has been at least 91 kidnappings. The average ransom that is sought ranges between 100,000 to 1 million. And these kidnappings usually go hand in hand with sexual abuse and or death. In a country where the GDP, which I don't have right now actually, but the majority of the population in Haiti is poor. So the reality that they are able to pay these ransoms is actually very improbable. Gangs are able to loot, murder, and kidnap with impunity. Nobody is spared from these crimes. So who is governing them? The government, the opposition, business elites. Really, each and every one of these groups have reasons to contract and arm these gangs, because they are heavily armed, to protect their own interests. Meanwhile, ordinary Haitians are suffering the consequences. And essentially women, as is the case during conflict, women and children and other vulnerable groups are the most likely to bear the brunt of these misfortunes. An estimate show that 8,500 women and children are among those who have had to flee their homes in search of safety. Let's talk about COVID-19 then. So the Brazilian, English, and Delta variants have been found in Haiti at the moment. And as of the 3rd of July, 436 people have died from COVID. And there are 18,658 confirmed cases from the 19th of March to the 1st of July. Sorry to correct that figure there. But these numbers are considered an undercount due to the lack of testing and the availability of the coronavirus treatment centers in many parts of the country. And because of these armed ganged violences, medical centers and hospitals are actually having to relocate because of having to dodge bullets and not be able to actually look after the patients in these centers. So people are having to be, having to rely on home remedies and over-the-counter medications to treat symptoms. The Public Health and Population Minister, Dr. Marie-Greta Clément, has transferred control of COVID-19 vaccinations to the private sector. The Plateforme des Organisations Haitiennes des Droits Humains, the the platform of Haitian Organizations for Human Rights, the Association of Pharmaciens, I can't think of the word in English, and the Organization for of Citizens for a New Haiti, have deemed this irresponsible, as this is a public health matter and not to be left in the hands of the privately selected few. So why is Haiti here? And Luke was alluding to this before he introduced this talk, right? Talking to the historical context that Haiti has had to endure. So we all, or perhaps most of us, are familiar with the indemnity or reparations that Haiti had to pay back to France in recognition of its independence as the first Black republic and the first country to abolish the trade and traffic of enslaved Africans. Haiti has been paying a very high price for freedom ever since, paying into the coffers of the French and other European countries who loaned money to Haiti in order to help them pay off the 90 million gold francs that France demanded of them through gunboat diplomacy. Also, the US was steadily making its encroachment on the Haitian state, having its first occupation there between 1915 to 1934 under the guise of instilling instability after several rebellions had taken place against the growing dominion of the Americans over Haitian affairs. And this is a quote from the acting Secretary of the Navy, Benson, instructed Admiral Caperton in 1915. "I'm directed to assure that the Haitian people, the United States of America, has no object in view except to ensure, establish, and help to maintain Haitian independence and the establishing of a stable and firm government by the Haitian people. Every assistance will be given to the Haitian people in their attempt to secure these ends. It is the intention to retain United States forces in Haiti only so long as will be necessary for this purpose." Okay, 100 years later, that rhetoric sounds the same. So for centuries, Haiti has been under foreign military and political rule and control. During this time of the occupation, the US was using, said they were using a pacification campaign. And this campaign was using aerial strikes to obliterate the rural populations, especially, who were fighting against this occupation. The US didn't waste time in forcing Haitians to change their constitution. Okay, so bearing in mind, Haiti won its independence in 1804. In 1805, they had their new constitution, where Article 12 stated of the general provisions that all property which formerly belonged to any white Frenchman is incontestably and of right confiscated to the use of the state. The Americans came in, altered this part of the constitution, not only this part, but essentially granted anyone, read white people, access to Haitian territory. This again rings true to today. So during Haiti's the intention to transition to democracy then. In 1991, Jean-Bertrand Aristide was the first democratically elected head of state for more than 30 years after the Duvaliers. But sadly, a few short months after, he was ousted from office by a brutal coup d'etat. And then he was actually brought back into power by the US, also being coerced into introducing neoliberal policies and the structural adjustment programs that the US had been enforcing on many Caribbean countries at the time during the 90s. This created unrest in society and was another sign of a Haitian president being manipulated by foreign powers. On January 31st and February the 1st in 2003, Jean Chrétien's liberal government organized the Ottawa Initiative of Haiti to discuss the country's future. No Haitian officials were invited to this assembly, where high-level US, Canadian, and French officials decided that Haiti's elected president must go. The dreaded army should be recreated, and that the country would be put under a Kosovo-like UN trusteeship. So this was the Ottawa Initiative, okay? So back in 2001, right, Jean-Bertrand Aristide is demanding restitution from France, okay? They want this 90 million gold francs back, which at the time, in 2001 US dollars, was equivalent to 21 billion US dollars. So Aristide declares this in 2001. In 2003 then is this Ottawa Initiative, and these countries, waste no time in ousting Aristide and exert pressure on the UN Security Council, and thus the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1529 was born, adopted unanimously on the 29th of February 2004. So after expressing concern about the situation in Haiti, the Council authorized the deployment of an international force to the country to stabilize the situation following a coup d'etat that resulted in the removal of President Jean-Bertrand Aristide from office. So Haitians have had to live under the various occupations of the United Nations. One, the United Nations mission in Haiti, UNMIH, from September 93 to June 96. The United Nations mission in Haiti, MINUSTAH, 2004 to 2017. The UN mission for justice support in Haiti in October 2017, and the BINU, the UN Integrated Office in Haiti, as of October 2019. So how is a country meant to flourish, celebrate its sovereignty, if you constantly have these UN missions essentially telling you what to do? So this is all under the mandate of the core group. The core group is composed of the special representative of the UN, Secretary General, ambassadors of Brazil, Canada, France, Germany, Spain, the European Union, and of course the US, as well as the special representative of the OAS, the Organization of American States. Why is the present crisis being allowed to continue? As we've seen, Haiti's sovereignty has been challenged since 1804. It's also a matter of geopolitics, okay? Haiti is very much strategically located in the Caribbean basin, and Maryse has the backing of these core group members that we mentioned. And while these groups are the arbiters of Haitian politics, playing an active role in Haitian affairs, economics, politics, and society, they don't necessarily have to consult with the Haitian government, and they don't actually have a mandate or a specific term. And there's been a very loud silence from this particular core group regarding the current crisis, and to some extent the referendum. However, the UN and OAS have been supporting the referendum, offering advice and editing the drafts. And more importantly, the OAS has been working towards ensuring that elections take place to swear in a new president next year, February. And in early June, a delegation of OAS representatives arrived in Haiti, comprised of Canada, Costa Rica, Ecuador, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and the United States. So the fact that the EU and OAS are actually calling for these free and fair elections in Haiti, while COVID-19 is on the rise, there's an escalation in armed gang violence, and the legitimacy of authorities is in question. The question is, what planet are they actually living on to not see that justice needs to be put in place in Haiti before any democratic elections can take place? And these are actually the words of our contacts on the ground who are having to live and endure this very harsh reality. So going back to geopolitics then, all of this is very much connected to US foreign policy. So remember, they changed the 1987 constitution. So land ownership has been transferred from rural populations to multi-cores. Haiti very much relies on land for its agricultural production, but because of poor resource management, natural catastrophes, and foreign ownership of their territories, food sovereignty is very much an issue. Hunger is a prevalent preoccupation among the Haitian population. And Artibonite is essentially the rice zone in the north of Haiti, but Haiti is now the third largest importer of rice from the US in the world. Inflation is going up by 27% per annum. Haiti is rich in gold, bauxite, silver, but the Australians are now moving in to extract these resources. Also, there were comments about Venezuela and Haiti earlier on. We also saw that Moïse has recognized Juan Guaido as the legitimate leader of Venezuela, which is, doesn't bode well for Haitian and Venezuelan relations. And also Haiti has recognized Taiwan, right? So we're seeing this pattern here of very much pandering to the wants of the United States. And let's see. And then just really to close this presentation, as I've shared quite a bit of information, when I speak to our contacts on the ground, and ask them, what can we do from where we are? It's essential, and as Charlene was saying, that we need to have solidarity, okay? We owe Haiti, all right? Haiti is the first Black republic. Haiti abolished slavery first. Haiti helped many other countries in the Americas to gain their independence and to abolish slavery. And it was the first post-colonial country in the Caribbean to demand reparations from Europe for historical injustices, which we're seeing are playing into the present today. So from wherever you are, okay, we can do something to demonstrate solidarity, because social movement and solidarity comes in many different forms. And an easy way to begin with would be to sign up to the Haiti Support Group newsletter, to continue looking at our website for updates, as we will be continuing to work to provide these updates. And also check in on your Haitian friends to see how you can support them, because we are stronger in numbers. L'union fait la force, as we are very much aware. So very much in line with what Charlene was saying. I had the opportunity to meet Charlene last month at the Caribbean Studies Conference, to join these forces where we can really work together to show our solidarity with Haitians and put pressure on these governments to do better. Because recently, I believe, one of these members of the core group said, dialogue is necessary. That's diplomatic talk. We're seeing that Haitians are taking to the streets, right? The violence is increasing. These are one of the worst times that Haiti is seeing. So a radical overhaul of the current institution and system that is in place is very much needed. So with that, I want to say thank you for listening. And there is our website. It's already been shared in the chat, but my email is there as well, chair@haitisupportgroup.org. Sans justice, pas gain la paix, kembe fem, pas la guerre. Thank you very much.